Hello and welcome. Today I am joined by Richard Collinge, who is a physiotherapist and is currently Head of Medical Services at West Ham. So Richard, thank you for joining.
My pleasure, Andy. Nice to see you.
Likewise. So we spoke briefly beforehand and I've already learned a few things, but even though you've worked a lot of your time in London, whereabouts are you from originally?
Originally from Stoke-on-Trent, from the Potteries. So I was based there till I was 18 years of age. And then went off to university over in Nottingham. So I had 3 years over in Nottingham, Andy. Did my undergrad degree there. And then I had that choice of, do I stay in Nottingham? Because I had an opportunity to work in one of the hospitals there post-graduation. I had the option to go up to Leeds or an option to come to London. And I chose the latter in the end. 1995, way back when. I started in Nottingham, 3 years there. 98, I moved down to London, and I started my junior jobs, as they were called then. Goodness knows what the grading system is now. But I started my junior jobs at St Mary's Hospital in Paddington. I had my 2-year kind of rotations. The equivalent of the junior house jobs for a doctor back then. But I was also thinking I need to be doing something at the weekends, and football was my passion. And that's how I started getting into football, really. I was going down to Crystal Palace and working in their youth academy, starting with the under-9s, I think it was, way back then. And that eventually led to my first full-time role in football at Brentford.
Right. So in terms of that's going back to actually why you chose physio in the first place then, so what motivated that?
Yeah, let's say I come from a sporty family, sporty background, so I enjoyed my football predominantly. As ever, injury caught up with me. I fractured my leg in a tackle, had surgery on that. And of course, I had some physiotherapy after that, Andy. And I kind of thought, well, professional sport or even semi-pro sport's probably not going to happen after the injury. And I enjoyed the relationship I built up with my physiotherapist. I enjoyed the work and asking questions as to what that therapist was doing to help me to get better and improve my function. And that was the stimulus for, choosing my GCSEs and A-levels and getting the right kind of channel of education to allow me to apply for a physiotherapy degree.
And what was it like in terms of trying to get onto a physio course? Like Nottingham's got a good reputation. There are quite a few people that have been there. But was that easy for you to get in there?
At the time, I think you had about 8 choices of universities. So I remember applying anywhere from, Bradford, Leeds had schools of physiotherapy at the time. Manchester was a very popular one and probably the biggest one in the country. I think Manchester had around 100 students at that moment in time, Andy, sorry. So what appealed to me in Nottingham was the size of the course. At that time, it was 30 students. And I think, of my particular intake, I think we were pretty much the first year that was 50% boys to girls. So, things were changing in physiotherapy at that moment in time. Whereas the previous year before I applied were 28 females and two males. So I applied. We went through the interview process, and at that time it was fingernail checks and hand cleanliness and goodness knows what. It was quite old school. The expectation within those interviews at the time was obviously you were to have a passion for the NHS and working within it, which certainly I think after 3 years of working in the NHS, I think it's a fantastic learning environment, and I've got some great friends and professional mentors that I still keep in touch with over from 20 years back now. Nottingham was my choice, really. When I went for the interview, I liked the people. I went for further open days and spoke to former students there and noted that quite a few former students went on and did well in the world of sports medicine and within the NHS and private practice. So I felt that was the course for me. Got my head in the books, got the grades I needed, and had a really great 3 years in Nottingham, whereby I think it's a different experience to a lot of courses, Andy. In fact, your first year is obviously all your anatomy and physiology, and then second and third year I was sent out on placements to Grantham, Derby, Leicester, Mansfield, and of course you're going out to do your 1,000 hours of kind of practice in different disciplines to make sure that you tick all the boxes to ensure you're going to be a great physiotherapist when you graduate. So some really varied experience in and around the East Midlands area, and really nourishing time for me.
But did you always have in mind that you wanted to end up in sport? Like how established? I mean, having spoken with quite a few people already, it wasn't a big profession then, but it was probably at that time getting a little bit bigger.
Yeah, I remember, and I've still got the cutout somewhere from one of the newspapers just before I applied to Nottingham, and it's always about, you know, the person that ran onto the pitch with a bucket of water and a sponge. You know, that was the perception of the physiotherapist, the team physiotherapist, and that person would probably, you know, help make the substitutions at that moment in time, probably help the kit man, and probably did a bit of everything. So I think, you know, the whole credibility of the profession has exploded since then, really. And don't get me wrong, that's come alongside, as we were chatting about previously, Andy, in terms of sports and exercise medicine doctors, in terms of sports therapists that have come through. And, you know, I've worked with some excellent sports therapists in the past, but this whole holistic model of care that we give athletes nowadays, I think, you know, the physiotherapy role became even more pivotal over time. So yeah, I always had the intention of going into sports physiotherapy. I said that was my passion, and to me, it felt like, you know, a hobby combined with my profession, effectively. So yeah, I've been incredibly, I guess, fortunate. I've worked hard to get where I've got at this time, but ultimately, yeah, pressures, the demands of the job have changed over the years. But yeah, I always had that intention as a fledgling physiotherapist that I'd want to work at a good level. Sports medicine.
So you said that Brentford was your first like proper sort of expose into that then?
Yeah, so that was back in 2001, Andy, of recollection. So that's my first full-time job, and I was supporting the first team physiotherapist there. So I was a number 2 physio, and going back to, you know, Brentford was a very different club back then. We used a university training facility, and I think we had 1 treatment bed between 2 physios, and the gym was combined with the canteen, and yeah, we had an exercise bike, a row machine, bench press, stretching mat, and a trumpet. I think that was about it, Andy. So yeah, we were fighting for the treatment beds. We were strapping at one end, and my colleague Phil was strapping at the other end. But in all seriousness, it made me learn probably the hard way. I had to improvise. I had to apply my knowledge very, very quickly. I had to learn from Phil, my colleague. He'd been in the game a long period of time, but I kind of cherry picked ideas off him. But yeah, the facility wasn't great at that moment in time, but yeah, it made me think on my feet, and I was doing what I said 5 minutes ago. I was helping out with the kit man, and I was driving a minibus with the youth team, and you were doing all those roles because you just mucked in and you got on with it. That was the expectation.
So like, what league were they in then, and like, what does it feel like to look at them now? Like, again, you know, hammering Man U recently. And
I know, yeah. So they were equivalent League One at the time, and knocking around the top, I think it was Huddersfield and Brighton, and Steve Coppell was the manager. But yeah, we got to a playoff final that year, and that was held in Cardiff at the Millennium against Stoke, funnily enough. So it was a bit weird in my first season of football. You know, my mates from Stoke were in the Stoke end, obviously, and I was working for Brentford. But yeah, I got to work with some great staff, some great players, learned incredibly quickly. You know, the learning curve in the NHS was incredibly steep, but being thrust into, you know, a League One club at that moment in time, and yeah, as ever, you got to have thick skin and got to be prepared to make the sacrifices, work the weekends, travel, be in the hotels, all those things we know about, Andy. But yeah, I again had to learn on the job, and yeah, I learned an awful lot in that first year. And yeah, you look at a club like Brentford, you could don't get me wrong, it was different ownership back then. So I think the ethos of the club has changed incredibly over the years. And yeah, you look back, well, you're talking 20 odd years about now, but where the club's kind of come from and where it is now, it's incredible to see. And I still keep in touch with staff and players at that club now, because I have done consultancy roles in between jobs that I've had, and going back each time, you can see the growth of the club. It's really nice to see, and I really respect, you know, the ethos of that club.
So how long were you there for?
I did that 1 season, and I then got the academy job at Watford. So that was 2002. So Ray Lewington had just taken over the role. I think Violi had just had his season at the club. The finances were tight. There was pay deferrals. There was threats of administration. But as ever, through adversity, we had a really good season. And we got to a League Cup semi-final. I think against Liverpool it was, 2-legged semi-final against Liverpool, and you know we finished mid-table in the Championship, which was, you know, very competitive at that moment in time, and with a threadbare budget, you know, Ray did a fantastic job. And again, I was learning off Luke Anthony at the time. He was my kind of mentor. He was the first team physio. I assisted him. So again, it was my step up the ladder to the Championship, having come from League One, where I was at with Brentford, Andy. But again, all of a sudden there was a big gym. There was a separate gym. There was a hydrotherapy pool up the road that we could go and use. And yeah, I learned off Luke, who I think at the time was doing his MSc. So I was kind of, again, cherry picking knowledge from Luke, like I had done Phil previously at Brentford, and I was learning off some really great people, sports scientists. Again, the level went up again at Watford for me. So, yeah, that was the start of my journey at Watford, from going from the number 2 physio to eventually heading things up there. But yeah, that felt like a big jump up, and all of a sudden, like I said, the infrastructure developed as well, Andy, and that was, having done it that way, going from Brentford to Watford, it felt a really nice transition at that moment in time.
So the fact that you did have, say, more facilities, bigger budgets, was that something that you was like straight away, was just, oh yeah, this is amazing?
I mean, we had 2 or 3 years where the budget was still pretty small, and in all honesty, I'd say there was a lot of budgetary issues when we first started there. When I first started there, so I think it was only when Eddie Boothroyd came in around 2005, and so Luke had left the club, and Andy Rolls came in, and we were able to take things on again. Martin Pert came in as well. Again, people that I respect and still keep in touch with now at their respective clubs. And we looked at, okay, if we haven't got the budget, how do we change the culture? So we looked at, what was probably quite novel at the time in terms of the player group we had, certainly at Watford. We looked at the injury prevention side. We looked at what we call the rehabilitation. So getting the players in the gym before training as part of an activation program, trying to make the players as good athletes as we could, Andy, making them more robust, more resilient. We had an NLP practitioner come in, so neuro-linguistic programmer. So we were starting to think, more globally at that stage, more holistically as a department, and that was, really, really good. Actually, it was the first time we'd really put, I think, everything into these players. And the players initially, as ever, we had a few laggards. There was a bit of resistance to change, but with a group that probably weren't, without being too harsh, technically probably weren't the best players in the league at that moment in time. And on a small budget, we got to the playoff final and beat Leeds again in Cardiff to get promoted to the Premier League. So I think that's when the budget, to answer your question, probably ramped up, Andy. And that, as ever, that can bring about its own challenges and problems. But what was really important was the culture that certainly Adi empowered us to put in place with the players, because we made the players great athletes. We made them more robust, I think, physically and psychologically, and we got the rewards on the pitch at the end of that season and getting promotion. So I don't think the budget was huge at that moment in time, but I think we looked at what we could do on a budget.
Yeah. So where did the NLP come from then? Whose idea was that?
Yeah, so we had it was called AD Boothroyd had worked with a gentleman called Keith Mincher. And Keith came in. I think eventually he ended up working with England and the FA. And Keith came in, I think initially part-time. He'd do kind of 1 day a week. But what was really nice was the fact Keith worked the players and the staff. He saw that, as therapists, we were around the players maybe more than the manager and the coaching staff were, because they would work on the pitch for maybe 60, 90 minutes every day with the players, where obviously if the players are coming in for treatment pre and post, or clinic in the hotel, as therapists, probably our body language, our communication skills, how we articulated certain aspects of the point that we wanted to get across. Keith saw that we were key to that, and the word promotion was articulated very early on that season. And probably most of us were thinking, okay, a bit of a long shot, but yeah, we wanted to keep verbalising the word, and eventually it kind of stuck, really. And yeah, we had a bit of a battle with, I think it was Sheffield United and Leeds were up there that season, and Reading. But yeah, eventually that kind of communication stuck and the behaviour stuck, and so we had a fantastic season. But Keith was fundamental to doing group sessions with the players and the staff. We'd all go into our meeting room, which is called the Carpe Diem room. And yeah, Keith he was very good at storytelling. And you'd come out of that meeting, you're thinking, what was that all about? But actually, over time, you began to realise, right, that's what he meant. And he was very clever at getting his points across, what he would say covertly. And you come out of that meeting thinking, is he talking about me there? Or is he talking about the physios or the doctors? He was very astute in the way he did it. But yeah, we definitely got better as a staff from that. We bonded with the players. I was telling someone at West Ham yesterday, actually, that we went walking over hot coals, and we We went climbing high ropes and wires, almost like the Go 8 type things as a group, whitewater rafting pre-season, all those team building exercises AD and Keith drove forwards. And I really look back with fond memories. And I say a lot of the people I keep in touch with now, I think is because of that. We bonded as a group, and we just had the right mix of skill base and experience and individuals and personalities at that moment in time to gel and cohese and get what we wanted, which was promotion at the end of that season, Andy.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So are those sort of classic team building things, does that not happen anymore then? Is that quite a rare thing that you experienced?
Again, I think there's different ways of doing it. Different managers, different regimes have different ways of doing it. Obviously, the last 2 years have been incredibly difficult anyway. It's been hard enough to go out and see your family and friends, let alone kind of work together as a group and do anything of that regard. But I think it's coming back in after COVID. So yeah, certainly pre-season we went out on kind of mountain bikes. We went to Evian in France. We went out as a group on mountain bikes, and we went. We'll often have a barbecue at the training ground, and we did likewise in Evian on pre-season. So there are gatherings and get-togethers. I just think looking back then to AD and Keith's kind of strategy, I think we probably put more emphasis on that back then, and maybe that was what AD prioritised. He just thought, right, as a team and as a staff, we've got to be really tight knit to get the results. So I think, yeah, any organisation will benefit from doing those kind of activities. I just think the last couple of years have probably been quite difficult, Andy, because of the COVID restrictions.
Yeah, I would have thought the current manager, he's always seemed to be really built on team spirit. Again, in his time at Everton, it seemed like it was a similar sort of mindset of that sort of culture.
Yeah.
But yeah, so in terms of Watford then, so where did you move on to from Watford?
Yeah, so I carried on at Watford until 2009. I was promoted to head of medical. So Malky Mackay had just taken over. So I think Malky was there for 2 years. So I did the head of medical role for 2 years. In the meantime, I'd done my part-time studies. I'd done my MSc at UCL, Andy. So again, that had really helped me to push on and gave me more confidence really in terms of my clinical skills. I'd gone and done a placement over at the British Olympic Institute over at Norfolk Park, as it was then, with Greg Retter. I'd done a 100-hour placement with him. And as ever, you do all your portfolios for your MSc and all the modules. So I came through the back of that a better clinician. I think it gave me more management skills as well. Don't get me wrong, I still had a huge amount to learn, but all of a sudden I was in that head of medical role, and then you do start to look at budgets and your staffing levels and appraisals, and it's the managing upwards with the board, and good communication with the manager and the coaching staff, which before in a number 2 role I've pretty much been sheltered from. So all of a sudden it was like stepping to the fore. So we had 2 years at Watford with Malky as the head of medical when, again, the budget wasn't great. We were heavily reliant on the academy. And at the time, the Mark Warburton was putting together the Harefield Academy, which is all about, the Ajax model, really, Andy, in terms of education on site and football coaching on site. So it was an exciting period at the club at that moment in time. But again, the budget was low. But we sat down as a medical sports science department and said, right, we've not got a huge amount of money to play with, certainly compared to some of the other teams in the league. So the recruitment was tailored to that. But also, again, we went back and revisited the culture. Right, let's get these guys in the gym. Let's get them fitter, faster, stronger. And, with some great sports science support, we did so. And again, we had again, I think we were just outside the playoffs that year, recollection, Andy, kind of top 8, I recall, which with the budget we had was a great achievement. And obviously then Malky was offered the Cardiff City job off the back of that. And I was then at that crossroads of do I stay or do I go type thing. But yeah, with Cardiff, I saw the next progression really, Andy. I could see a canvas there, not a blank canvas. There'd been an awful lot of work put into that club at Cardiff because they've moved to the new stadium. Sean Connolly had worked really hard there over the years. I think Sean's done one of these podcasts, and I really valued Sean's experience when I went in there. The training ground was good, but needed a little bit of upgrading because I don't think we had our own gym at that moment in time at Cardiff. We were using the Vale Hotel gym. So all of a sudden we were bringing in, the Craig Bellamy's of this world and some higher profile players, and you're thinking, well, we can't go and work up at the hotel gym with, the leisure kind of membership individuals that were working at the same time. So, yeah, I made the decision to go to Cardiff. and for 2.5 years, things went incredibly well. We had designs on a new training ground. I think in the first season, Andy, we got to the playoffs in the first season. That's right. We'd played Liverpool in the Carling Cup final as it was then, so this was 2012. Taken that game to extra time and penalties and lost narrowly on penalties, let's put it that way. But by the end of a 55-game season, we ran out of steam. And ironically, we lost to West Ham in the playoff semi. And then we kind of had to batten down hatches because the next season was going to be tough. Because, again, change was rife because the owner was putting Cardiff City into red shirts, going away from the tradition of the blue shirts. And that was, again, in terms of Vincent Tan's culture, red was the lucky colour. But in exchange, obviously, the transfer budget went through the roof, and Malky was able to bring in the kind of players that he wanted, and we won the league that year. I think we won it by late March. So we had a fantastic season. So it was probably the first time in my career I was all of a sudden being presented with these plans for a new training ground. I said, right, Rich, what would you like there, and where are we going to put the pool, and how many pitches? And okay, this is interesting. Obviously started the Premier League season that year, and things started well. Then, as ever, often the politics get in the way of football, and whatever happened in the background happened. And obviously, Malky unfortunately lost his job, and then you're often in that position as I was there, head of performance, of saying, well, look, there's a new manager coming in. What do I do? And it just felt the right thing after 2.5 years that I kind of moved back to London from Cardiff and looked for the next project, Andy. So I had 2.5 fantastic years at Cardiff, where I really believe we took the club forwards and achieved some great things. But it's probably the one project that ended too soon. Often those things in football and sports medicine, get taken out of your hands. And it's hard, but as ever, you've got to make the right decision for, at that time myself, my wife, my family, and it felt the right time to move back to London.
So when you're speaking that, you do see that medical staff may move with a manager that they've worked with previously. But what are the things that particularly would interest you to move to Cardiff or to leave? What are the things that excited you to take the role?
Yeah, for me, Andy, it's the project, and I want to know about the culture. I want to know that you can go in and affect change. I looked at the project that I had at Watford, and I'd been there 9 years, from 2002 to 2011, I think it was, Andy. So, I progressed from that number 2 physio to the head role, as I said. I felt that I had taken the department as far as I could, and I'd almost made up my mind before the Cardiff approach actually came along. I'd made up my mind that I was going to leave Watford, because I'd asked for certain things in terms of budget, equipment, staffing, and I didn't feel I was going to get those things. And again, that's me. I want to be able to, each season, even now, I want the players to come back and notice something different. I want to have the backing to say, right, whether it's an extra member of physio staff or a new soft tissue therapist or a new piece of machinery, I want to do something different every pre-season, because I think the players then sit back and take note and realise that you're trying to advance the department. So I just felt at Watford at the end of that season that maybe I'd taken the department as far as I could, and I wasn't probably going to get the complete backing that I needed. So, I looked at the project at Cardiff, and obviously, Malky was powerful in terms of, I had a very good working relationship with him. He'd been a player at Watford and obviously gone into coaching. I think he'd assisted Brendan Rodgers and AD Boothroyd. So I had a very good personal, professional relationship with Malky, and I liked his way of working, and I liked his values. And I went over to Cardiff. Obviously, I'd looked round, met some of the staff, and I thought, this is the next project for me. Was it ideal that it was 150, 175 odd miles down the M4? No, it wasn't. There's a lot of miles up and down that motorway. I think I know every cat's eye and lamppost, to be honest, up and down that road. But ultimately, it was the right thing for me and my family and my career at that moment in time. And I'm one of those people, Andy, I don't have any regrets about any club I've worked at or when I've chosen to leave. I kind of gather the information. I look at the project that I'm leaving, and I look at the projects I'm going to, and I like to think I'm quite a logical thinker. I weigh up the evidence, and obviously, sit down with my wife and my family, and ultimately we try and make good, informed decisions between us, but also realise that football can change tomorrow. That's the roller coaster that I guess anyone that's done these podcasts and worked in elite sport's been on, and I've had that for 20 years where there's good days, there's bad days, there's good weeks, bad weeks, but ultimately, you just got to decide what's right for you at that moment in time, and Cardiff felt the right thing.
And then, so what were the options, or what did you decide to come back to after you'd done Cardiff?
Yeah, so I mean that was the January that I left Cardiff, 2013, I think it was, Andy. So I had options of other clubs. It didn't feel right mid-season, to be honest, going to another club. So I thought I'd kind of sit out what it was, 4 or 5 months, whatever was left of that season. And I went and did some private clinics in London. I did some consultancy at Brentford, who were League One at the time, but just about to get promoted to the Championship. I just kind of enjoyed being back at home, to be honest, for 4 or 5 months, just to get a breather from the driving. And what I would say, Cardiff, whenever we travelled as a team, everything felt a long distance away. We, having been at Watford, where you're in a good geographical location where, pretty much within a couple of hours you could get to most games, barring whatever Middlesbrough and I think Newcastle were in the Championship that season. So, Watford was nicely situated geographically, whereas Cardiff, everything felt like a long old way. It felt like many hours on the team coach. And yes, we were fortunate enough to fly to, your Norwiches and Ipswich that season, and Middlesbrough and Hull, I think it was. But Cardiff felt a long way away. It was just good to be back at home for 6 months. So I went in at Brentford for, I think it was 3 or 4 days a week, and just kind of hopefully gave them some of my experience and knowledge that I picked up along the way. Worked with some great people there again for the second time, and I waited to see what would come up in the summer, really. And that's when I went to Wigan. I met Uwe Rosler, and I went in at Wigan for 6 months and worked up in the northwest. Again, which was tough because Wigan had been relegated. It obviously won the FA Cup. I think they've been in the Championship one season, just missed out on the playoffs. So again, they were a club going through an awful lot of change. But I liked Uwe Rosler, really infectious character, an immense work ethic, and I liked the project that he was presenting to me. It was difficult on the pitch. We had 6 difficult months there. In terms of, I think Uwe was there until October. Then, funnily enough, Malky Mackay came back in as manager through no kind of link of my own, but he knew some of the other staff behind the scenes there, obviously interviewed for the role, and Malky came back in again. But in the meantime, I'd applied. The Watford job had come back up again, and I'd gone full circle, Andy, to be honest. I ended up coming back into Watford, which was a very different club to the one I'd left back in 2011. So, I mean, that was around, 5 years later. And the Pozzo family had taken over. They'd invested in the infrastructure. Of course, there was more money, there was more budget around. And that then led to, obviously, promotion back to the Premier League. And some interesting times with different managers and coaches. It was that was hard. You talk about embracing change in different cultures, and when the manager and head coach is changing as regularly as it is at Watford, it is difficult in the role I was in as head of medical to adjust every time that a new manager and head coach came in. So that again, it was interesting to go back to Watford, but it presented different challenges, and they really did.
So how many, because Watford notorious at that point for having loads of different managers, but what was that like then? What was the continuity like from your perspective? Like, who led what you were even doing on the sort of performance side?
Yeah, I mean, so I kind of led it. We had an array of Spanish, English, Italian staff. So you've got to remember at that moment in time, the Pozzo family owned 3 clubs. So they had Watford, obviously here in the UK, they had Udinese in Italy, which they still own, obviously, and they had Granada at that moment in time in Spain. So there was this culture of staff moving around between the clubs as there was the players. We went and did CPD visits and in-service training. I went over to Udinese and Granada several times. Granada just put a new training ground in situ, so I went to see that. And as ever, I think what was nice at those moments were, again, I was able to cherry pick different aspects of what I thought was good about that training ground, or good about that culture, or I don't know, did the layout of the canteen and the food look better at Granada and Udinese than it did at Watford. So, my role was very much fact-finding in that regard, and bringing what was forward-thinking practice into Watford. So we bought one of the cryo chambers. This was 2015, 2016. I think it was ourselves at Watford and Leicester that invested that year, Andy. And obviously Leicester went and won the league, and Watford stayed in the Premier League for the first season, finishing mid-table. So, I think the stuff like the cryotherapy helped. We bought one of the hyperbaric chambers. We were just doing different things after a midweek game. I know if we played away at Nottingham Forest on a Tuesday night, we'd always go back to a hotel, back to Software House, and we'd do recovery there the Wednesday morning. So the guys would stay in the hotel the Tuesday night. We get them up in the morning, do spin bike, massage, use the pool, have lunch at the hotel, then off they go. So we're just doing different things, just trying different things, and hey ho, so we finished mid-table Premier League and got to an FA Cup semi-final. So it worked, but then you were thinking, well, that was a success, and then that head coach at that moment in time lost his job at the end of that season. The next one came in, so you end up adjusting again, and again, every regime is different, and sure, as many people on your podcast have alluded to, you have to be a bit of a chameleon. You have to adapt to the new regime, but still have your inner core values, central to the way you practice. So it was difficult, Andy. It was difficult, and even now, no matter how how experienced you are at dealing with change or managing change, still it comes as a shock, and you've got to. I think over time you adapt more quickly. I think that's the only thing I'd say. After 20 years of seeing lots of different regimes and managers and coaches and players, I think ultimately you just become less resistant to change. You just appreciate it for what it is at a football club, and you just roll up your sleeves and you get on with it.
Yeah, but in terms of the medical and performance side, then, and you've got those different managers, and you kind of hear stories that some managers are way more hands-on than others. But I guess you're still leading what's actually happening, but it just kind of is tweaking it to them. Is that how it is?
Yeah, I mean, that's it. Every regime will bring their own, philosophy, their own technical and tactical approach. I think you're starting to see now, a lot of the continental managers might want to train in an evening because you're going to play in an evening the following day. So very much about how the player's physiology adapts to the demands of what's a TV schedule. To be honest, now, Andy, I think last season at West Ham we had probably 3 Saturday 3 o'clock kickoffs. So I always ask the question, well, why do we train? We probably report at 10 for 11 o'clock training session. We never kick off at 11 o'clock. So if you look at your body's physiology and all the circadian rhythms, without going too deep into it, your hormonal response. Why? Football's just always done what it's always done. It's always like 10 for 11, and that probably means, as it was way back when, people could go and play golf in the afternoons or pick up the kids or whatever. Where actually, the kickoff times now can range from anything from 12:30 through to 7:45, obviously. But your 5:30s or your 4:30s, 2:30s. So I think a lot of the newer regimes are starting to say, or newer managers are starting to think, well, why don't we try and replicate that kickoff time? In all honesty, I think it would take a couple of weeks of replicating that kickoff time, and that's the luxury that we don't have. If you're playing a game every 3 days, then it's very hard to replicate, or find an average kickoff time, whichever way you want to do it. So I just think, the regime that comes in can be varied. I'd say that might have a different technical and tactical focus. I think ultimately I've tried to embed the same culture. I would meet the manager and his coaching staff or the head coach early on and just say, look, this is what we've been doing. We're very open to change. Would you like to change a report time, or would you like to be in a hotel before the game the following day, or do we go back to the hotel after a game? And I think just be very open-minded and collaborative, Andy, is generally what I've learned over the years to allow me in my role to adapt and adjust. Because if I can't adapt and adjust, there's probably very little chance that my staff are going to do the same. So I've got to be seen to be open-minded, collaborate, and then if my staff see me doing that, lead by example, then that they will follow ultimately. But it's not an easy process, that's for sure.
And if you've ever had it where you just think this is not going to work with a particular manager, or you just think, I'm not sure this is going to gel quite as the way I want it to?
I don't think so. I think generally every manager, head coach, coaching staff I've worked with, I've always tried to be that open-minded individual. I think it's always good to, you've got to be diplomatic in the way you engage with the manager that's maybe done things for many years. And you've got to remember that most managers and coaching staff have been players as well, Andy. So they're on the conveyor belt coming through. So ultimately, what shaped them is ultimately the way that they trained when they were a player as well. So obviously these guys have gone off and done their coaching badges and their pro licenses, etc. So I think they like to ask questions of the medical and sports science team because they've been on the courses where they will have been educated as to what medical and sports science can offer. My approach is very much about how we give a platform to perform. And I've probably changed over the years, of course I have, whereby I think maybe if I look back 10, 15 years, it was generally about pulling players out of training. If we had a player that was joint compromised or a big injury history, it was about moderating what they did and maybe we undercooked those players on reflection. Unless I'm not saying we get it right now, but ultimately I'd like to think at every club I've been at, we've had very good injury rates, we've had good availability. I've always aimed for 90% availability for training and match play is generally the key performance indicator I ask of my staff. To get that, I think you've got to have a great culture with the players on board and buying into the gym work and the recovery work and buying their own equipment for home use and, engendering that 24/7 athlete kind of culture. What you do at West Ham for 3 or 4 hours a day is hugely important. But actually, when you get home and in your evening, how you sleep and what your sleep patterns are like, your sleep cycles, they are going to be, as ever, the 1% that make you finely tuned for the following day's training session and help you to recover and prepare to perform. So I think now, and certainly with the current manager at West Ham, we have a culture whereby, we want to encourage players to train. We want them to be fit and robust and resilient. That's the manager's expectation. I think that's perfectly reasonable. Of course, there are periods of time where we have to pull a player in or out, and of course, injuries happen. But I'm very proud of the availability I've had across the different clubs I've worked at, Andy. I like to think the model that I've put in at each club, of course, it probably replicates to a huge extent, but actually it's brought about good results and good objective results that I can slap down and say, ultimately, we've pretty much been around the 90% availability at every club I've been at. I would say when I first went in at Cardiff, I probably changed things too quickly. And that was, I guess, when you go in and you're new to an environment, and it was probably the first time I'd moved clubs and gone with a manager, I probably tried to change things too quickly. I tried to put too much to the players too soon, and they weren't ready for it. And I might have had 8 or 9 key objectives when I first went in, and I should have made sure that 2 or 3 of those had done really well. I think we had 8 or 9 things that were done to an okay level, Andy. But 2 or 3 of those I should have honed in and said, right, these are the first 2 or 3 strategies we're going to put in place to help these players. Get them on board, and then we'll move on to the next 2 or 3. So that's kind of one of my key learning points looking back, certainly over the last 10 years.
That's really interesting, isn't it? Because it's like with any business, really, that you're going in to try and implement change, but you want to do it in the right way. But could you give me an example of what 1 or 2 changes of those you might be?
At Cardiff specifically?
Yeah, well, you mentioned that one. So in terms of that,
I wanted to hone in on the recovery strategies, really, Andy. And I just felt, whether it was compression garments or recovery shapes or, as I said, 10, 15 minutes back, we didn't have our own gym. So I'm thinking, if I was a professional athlete coming into this environment and we've got to go up to the hotel gym, that doesn't sit well with me. It just does, I don't want, the Joe Public watching what we're doing with Cardiff City players in the gym in the hotel facility. That just didn't sit right with me. And that was part of the longer term objective. Getting promotion meant we could put our own gym in the building that we had and we shared with the Cardiff Blues rugby team at the time. So, it was very much about, right, how are we going to get a good activation culture? The stuff I've done at Watford, the activation, the prehab, good recovery strategies, let's get those 3 things right. But obviously within those, recovery strategies could cover 7, 8, 9, 10 different areas. So to help with that, we looked at bringing in sports science students, interns, that would help. Certainly if, Sean, myself and Adam, the physios at the time, were upstairs treating the players, right, what was going on downstairs with contrast bathing or the ice baths or, making sure the lads got a recovery protein shake on board quickly after training. So we needed people it was just a layout of the building, Andy. We were on 3 different floors. And obviously we couldn't be on all floors at any one time. So, generally the medical staff were upstairs on the top floor. But I was thinking, right, we need people downstairs manning that changing room. And we had a little activation space, which was tiny, but we made it a bit of a sports science lab. I just thought, right, if we can't get a gym in here, we need a bit of a sports science lab. So at least the players start to give it a bit of credibility, and we're trying to do the right thing. So yeah, it was heights, weights, body fats, urine testing. We started looking at saliva testing, but yeah, just focusing on the recovery and making sure these footballers were becoming good athletes and disciplined athletes at that. So we got good buy-in, but that'd be more one thing. I just think I chucked too many things at them at once. And we got there in the end. Don't be wrong, we got there in the end, Andy, but it probably took me 12 months, where I think I could have got them there quicker if I'd focused on 2 or 3 key strategies, got them right, and then moved on to the next 3 and the next 3, rather than going 12 different things at once, whatever.
Yeah, that really is interesting. And I know you've gone on to an MBA, haven't you, and looking into that. At what point did you start to think that you thought that would be helpful for what you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, I got to that kind of another crossroads in my career where, and this was 2 years back when COVID was just kicking off, and I've got a kind of a physiotherapy mentor who's been pushing me on to say, Rich, why don't you go on and do a PhD? And I'm thinking, oh, blimey. I just couldn't quite bring myself to do that. But I thought, right, I want to do something. I need to do something. And I'd seen kind of mini MBA courses advertised. And I just wanted to look back, and I was thinking, well, hang on, I've been doing these managerial roles for 10 years now. And I like to think I've got better at them over the course of that period of time, and just through experiential learning. But I wanted to try and understand, what I've been doing and why, really, and put some models to them. And I'd always been interested in, someone like Mark Warburton's a great example, where he worked in the city for one of the banks, and then came into football. So I used to, as I still do now, enjoy chatting to Mark Warburton. I think Malky had worked in a bank, and I quite like trying to understand, as Clive Woodward did, if you can bring business acumen into sport, I think that's hugely powerful. So that probably whet the appetite. I looked at these short courses and I thought, okay, and I spoke to the HR department at West Ham and said, look, I quite like to take myself on to the next level, and this is what I see as being that, really. So they said, well, why don't you do a full MBA, which sounded like a great idea at the time. And yeah, I mean, pretty much 2 years later, I mean, I've just graduated, but I've still got to do a Viva on my research. But ultimately, I've passed the MBA. There was some, it made me realise there's a huge amount of overlap in what I've been doing and what we often do from a scientific background. The models are often interchangeable and very similar, and have a similar background, Andy. And I learned some incredibly valuable new stuff as well. And it's enabled me to go to the CFO at our club and talk about a balanced spreadsheet. I wouldn't have had a clue before. So all of a sudden I'm looking at the budget of the medical team, and it's allowed me to go to our CFO or the chief exec and say, look, I want to buy this machine, or I think we need a new member of staff, and here's the financial justification for it. Don't get me wrong, it's led to some frustrations as well, because I can see where my own department can get better. I can see where our training facility, where our whole infrastructure could get better. But as ever, it goes back to the Cardiff thing. You can only affect a certain amount of change. But yeah, it's been a really nourishing couple of years again. It's been tough because I was doing the hardcore element of the study during last season, where we had a 55-game season travelling around Europe. So, and I think from February through to April, pretty much in the space of 8 weeks, I managed to investigate the mental health impact of COVID. Was my dissertation, choice of dissertation, Andy. So I used a validated questionnaire. I got results from 130 members of staff and players across West Ham. And I got all this data into this wonderful spreadsheet about mid-April, I think that was. And I think I was handed in the end of it. I thought, blimey, this is great. But that spreadsheet is huge. And I had so much data that, and all I said, didn't know what the hell to do with it. So with an awful lot of crunching and going back through some stats books, I managed to find some really good, fantastic stuff, actually, as to how the mental health impact had affected the workforce. And I managed to write up a 15,000-word dissertation and get that handed in, by end of April, early May, of recollection. So, yeah, it was tough, but I think to me, it feels like I'm a better practitioner for it. I'm a better manager. It allows me to communicate better across the club with the owners, or as I said, the CFO, the chief exec, and also help with the manager and the coaching staff and other departments at the training ground as to how we communicate and dovetail.
Yeah, no, it sounds great. It does sound really interesting. Are there any particular bits of data that you can crunch all that massive amount into a
Yeah,
10-second soundbite?
yeah. I mean, effectively, I had three groups. I had the office staff, the training ground staff, and the player cohort. So won't be surprised to learn that the player cohort were less impacted psychologically, and that might come down to their own kind of financial security. Plus, they have access to psychological coaching and well-being at the training ground, and the office staff were at the other extreme of the spectrum. And it was a statistical significant difference between the two groups to show that the office staff that have been working from home, Andy, probably didn't have the support network around them other than what we're doing on Teams now. I think that was the biggest factor. And the coaching staff kind of sat in the middle, really, in terms of still having some access to psychological support. But they weren't as heavily impacted as the office-based staff.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. And also, we missed out in terms of you going over to Canada to work in the MLS. How did that come about?
Yeah. So again, when was that? So that was 2016. And yeah, I had an opportunity to go over to Montreal. It was about the November time, Andy. And I had an approach to go over there and would have liked to go over and have a look around, do an interview. They wanted a head of therapy and rehabilitation was the job title. So I went over there. Not quite expecting the temperatures and the amount of snow. So I went over there, probably a naive boy from Stoke with a slightly thick ski jacket on and thinking, right, this is about -20 right now, and in a pair of very inappropriate shoes. And I rocked up in Montreal. Loved the training ground, loved the city. Did the interview. I liked, again, there was a gentleman called Adam Browse who was the technical director. I liked what he was kind of saying and selling to me, and met the coaching staff, and we kind of committed. And Sam, my wife, was able to come over with me for the year. She was able to take a sabbatical, and it makes you realise we talk about the travel in the UK and going around Europe, but actually, the MLS is the travel demands are massive, and even the climate, going from Montreal where it could be -20, you've been training indoors on AstroTurf for 2 weeks to then go, as we had the first game in San Jose where it was +20 on grass and flying 6-7 hours with the time difference. It's just the extremes were huge, and I think we had 3 private jets per year. Other than that, you were on Air Canada or Air Delta, and you were lugging all the medical skips around and all the kitman skips. So, it was the demands were massive. A really interesting locker room, as they called it there, obviously, where we had all the South American players who weren't particularly attuned to diet and hydration. I think I'll keep it as simple as that, Andy. And then we had the local Quebec boys who weren't as good technically, but had a fantastic work ethic. So, you'd had guys that had played in Europe, and we had a player like Laurent Simon who played with Belgium and the national team there, and played at a good level in Europe. And I think he was he was the guy I wanted to go to, because I think the other players would follow him. So I wanted to kind of anchor into him, and then as we did, the other players would follow. Again, that would have been a scenario of probably 4 or 5 years over there, Andy, to get it up to where I think it should have been as a UK standard. And what I mean by that was, so I was trying to engender a culture where we take a player to New York for an ankle consultation, or to Toronto, or back to London or Barcelona. And very much it's like, no, we have this guy downtown. He's our orthopedic doctor, and he will do anything from a finger to a toe to a knee replacement to an ACL or a shoulder. He was the generic orthopedic doctor. So that was hard. That was, again, respecting the values that they had as a club. And we didn't have the doctor wouldn't come into the training ground each day. Send the player downtown and see the doctor, down in the centre of Montreal. So, that needed time. And obviously I sat down with Sam and said, look, they'd offered me another 2 years to stay there, Andy, like year 2, year 3. But in terms of residency, and actually I was on like a temporary physio license. So to go to year 2, year 3, they could have turned around and said, okay, Rich, you need to go and do 3 hours of paediatric physiotherapy work at Montreal General Hospital in an afternoon to top up your knowledge base, because they wanted all my transcripts from universities, from UCL and from Nottingham. So I was like, okay. And for Sam to work over there as a doctor, she would have needed almost to retrain as well. So it's like, right, if we're staying year 2, we're pretty much staying, year 4, year 5, year 6. We're pretty much moving everything over, and we weren't quite ready for that, and in all honesty. And that's when we came back, and then I've ended up where I am now at West Ham. So
Yeah. Were there any things that they did over there that you thought actually that's something which would really, well, you have brought over with you?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the model is different in terms of obviously the clubs are the franchises. Um, that means that there's an awful lot more collaboration. There's a central medical notes database. It was called Healthy Athlete at the time. I'm not sure if it's still that system, but the MLS had access to all your medical notes. Um, but yeah, you'd have this reciprocal arrangement. So if Montreal were going to fly into San Jose, you could go and use San Jose's training ground in an afternoon, and it was quite nice to see. So they'd have the physio beds laid out for you. You know, some nice clean towels there for you. They'd mix up your recovery drinks. Interesting. They'd pretty much pull the blinds down while you were training. You know, there was that mutual respect because they knew sooner or later they were coming back to Montreal and they'd have to do the same. So I thought that was a nice element of it. I think the whole concussion situation is something where we're probably playing catch up in the UK, in all honesty. So it's a very sensitized culture in the MLS and Canada and America. So I think we had about 16 concussions in one season in Montreal. And to put that in perspective, we just had one per season at West Ham for the last 3 seasons. So yeah, concussion is viewed very differently, obviously, in the States, and obviously that stems from American football, where it's a very heightened sensitivity. But yeah, it's taken incredibly seriously, and we had 3 players retire with concussion-related issues at the end of that season I was there. It's the first time I've ever had any players retire with concussion, and they were coming to the end of their contracts. But it just goes to show the whole litigation side, the whole concussion aspect. It's highly sensitized there, and it really is.
Right. So was that just coincidental or unfortunate that you had so many that season?
I don't know. I think it was, let's say, those players were coming to the end of their careers. I think it was 1 goalkeeper and 2 outfield players of recollection. So yeah, I mean, when a player was coming and saying along, look, I've had 4 concussions this year, you were going back to your note system saying, well, okay, well, if you've had the 4, what we need, you then had a standardized protocol where the player would go for functional MRIs, brain MRIs, and they go and see a neurologist effectively to decide whether this was a career-ending injury, brain injury, obviously, or whether this was something that was inevitable as part of their career. I think this is where I often chat to sports lawyers about this. Where is this a work-related injury that players are sustaining, and the longer-term impacts in terms of CTE, the chronic traumatic encephalopathy, the dementia that we're seeing sadly in players in later years. We're dealing with something now that, as ever, it's hard to predict what may happen in the future. And if you look at the Jeff Astles, who were heading leather football that was laden with water and probably weighed about 5 or 6 kilos. The balls that the players play with nowadays are far lighter, but they're probably hitting them at far greater speed. If you look at the velocity and whip that these boys put on a ball when they cross it, it's incredible. And if you are repeatedly heading the ball, then does that accumulate over the lifespan of a player's career? So we did an interesting audit last year, counting every header that our players did in training sessions, Andy, and I was kind of pleased to see that through discussion with the coaching staff and the manager, not one player exceeded his weekly heading allocation within training. What happens on a match day is anyone's guess, and that might depend on tactics and if you're under the cosh or not defensively. But I think the culture is definitely improving in this country. Let's say in Montreal, whether it's coincidence, I don't know. I sense looking at the audit across the MLS, it was our numbers in Montreal were similar to most MLS clubs, Andy, to be honest.
Right.
So yeah, I think it's just, I think their screening is far more sensitive over there, and I think they certainly take it more seriously, and I think we're getting there. But yeah, again, it depends on also the values and culture that your players and your coaching staff and your manager and your medical team have as well. We've got to take it seriously now.
Yeah, definitely. And then just a final question, we're coming to the end of the time now, but in terms of like development for you, you've done the masters, and like what other things did you like in terms of? I'm a massive fan in terms of like, I've actually looked at doing my own masters, but I couldn't face doing it alongside other things. So I'm very impressed you've managed to do that as well. But like, in terms of like self-development for you, have you got any particular books that you like or anything else that you do?
Yeah, I think they're only it's Matthew Syed, isn't it? I think the books that he's written, I think are fantastic. There's another book, and I can't remember the name of the author. It's Black Box Thinking, which there's I like to learn from other disciplines, learn from other sports. I think if we're so focused and blinkered on football, I think we miss an awful lot, Andy. I say we'll always do what we've always done. If I can read a book like, going back a little bit now, the Clive Woodward book, and try and understand what he did for 2003, the World Cup win, or if I can read a Steve Redgrave book or a Mark Cavendish book, I like learning from different sports, but also different athletes. I like to know what makes somebody tick under the bonnet. So if I can try and understand, and I've read Chris Foy's books. I like my cycling, obviously, but I like to understand what makes these athletes good and what makes them great, but also likewise the best coaches, what makes them so good. And that's it. They may have come from their own sport pedigree, but also there are great football managers and rugby coaches that have come into things from a completely different environment. I think that's healthy from a sporting background as well. Mark Wolfson's a great example. What he brings into West Ham now might be different to what somebody who's not come from a City trader background can implement at a club. Black Box Thinking, Checklist Manifesto is another book I've read where without sounding too OCD about this, I have to have a morning meeting where I kind of plan what we're doing. I sit down with my medical team and I do that checklist manifesto like an airline pilot would do. You check all the buttons and knobs in the cockpit and the amount of fuel you're going to need, what weight you've got in the cargo, because ultimately, if things do go wrong, you want to make sure you've got enough contingency to make sure that it's like the swan kind of gracefully going across the water, but the feet are going 10 to the dozen underneath. Ultimately, I try and remain cool, calm, and composed. And I was chatting to my wife yesterday about the incident that happened on the pitch yesterday. All of a sudden, you're in front of 60,000 people, maybe a TV audience, and you've got a player that's unconscious on the pitch. You've got to work really quickly to decide what's safe for that player. You've got someone in your earpiece telling you what's happened, and the manager, kind of wanting to know what's going on in terms of substitutions. But ultimately, I've got that player's head in my hands, and I want to make sure his airway is open and he's breathing and he's circulating and there's no serious injury. And the referee's probably telling you to get on with it, and you've got 2 minutes, hurry up. So, I want to be able to think correctly under pressure. And I think by reading those books and having those checklist manifestos and doing a bit of mental rehearsal before the game to think, okay, Rich, what are you going to do if that player goes down and he gets a blow to the face and he's unconscious on the floor? What are you going to do? Or if he's wrapped around the goalpost because he's collided with the goalpost and he's got a head injury or a pneumothorax, a punctured lung from a rib fracture, what are you going to do? So I do that kind of mental rehearsal, and that's probably stuff I've just picked up from books like the Checklist Manifesto, Black Box Thinking, to try and put things in a logical order in my mind, Andy, for whatever scenario gets thrown at you, best or worst case.
No, that's really interesting. It is really interesting. You're seeing concussion becoming more and more prevalent and certainly talked about. But no, look, Richard, I really appreciate your time today. It's been fascinating. Again, very impressed that you've managed to do the MBA alongside all of that. So
I'm just about recovering now. 3 months later.
Well, you've managed to sort of have the composure, you see. So you sort of kept that. You've been like the swan on this one as well. So it's impressive. No, brilliant. Thanks for that, and best of luck this season. And I'll speak to you soon.
Cheers. Thanks, Andy.
Thanks very much.